Glad to know you're still with us. The telecommunications industry in Nigeria is grappling with a growing debt crisis linked to unstructured supplementary service data usage by banks, which now totals 250 billion naira. The debt issue emerged after disputes over USSD charges, with banks resisting proposed fee increases by telecom operators. As operational costs continue to rise due to inflation, currency devaluation, and higher fuel prices, the industry sustainability actually is at risk. And now mobile network operators have warned that without regulatory approval for tariff adjustments, they may be forced to suspend USSD services, potentially disrupting banking transactions nationwide. Now, this is the story. And joining us to unpack this is Tajudeen Ibrahim, the Director of Research and Strategy at Chapel Hill Denham. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mr. Ibrahim.
Thank you for having me on the show, Aperture.
Always. Well, now, going through this report, I see an industry on its knees begging to be saved. Isn't it sort of ironic that another industry that has been declaring unprecedented gains is the one adding to the MNOs' woes?
So I think it is rather unfortunate that the banking sector is now, seen as a major, negative, element in the activities of the telecommunications sector, because naturally speaking, one would have expected the activities of the banking sector to be a lot accretive to the activities of the telecommunications sector. And I reckon that there is need for the banking sector to work alongside the telecom sector, and also including the regulators on both sides to ensure that they resolve the current problems that we have. So it is a negative development, and I think it should not be allowed to linger for too long before the problem is solved, considering the enormous impact that the USSD code has on transactions in the banking sector. In 2022, for instance, it was estimated that well over 5 trillion was the value of transactions that were carried out using USSD. The banking sector cannot do it on its own, and the telecom operators too cannot do it on their own. Both of them need each other in that regard.
Well, now I would like you to sort of give us some background or insight, if you may, on why this has become, a recurring issue. Why are we always coming to this point?
So we're always at this point because there is no concrete arrangement between the two parties. I'm talking about the telecoms operators and also the banking sector. Because the banking sector, for instance, at some point when the issue was resolved in 2022 and 2021, said that they did not understand how the telecommunication operators came up with the cost component. So this is the reason that I believe the two sides of that segment of the financial system need to sit together to agree on the terms and conditions, and also be transparent around what the pricing should be. They should also be transparent around who bears what cost, and and to what extent, and what will also be the tolerable level of receivables or payables over what period. I think all these elements are not spelled out. The last time that they had an agreement that the telecommunication operators will be charging something that is a little less than 7 naira per USSD transaction. And at some point, the banking sector had started to pay down on this debt, but industry sources suggest that the payment is slow. And that, to my mind, is the reason that the number has accumulated to around 250 billion naira as we speak. I think there is a need for a roundtable discussion between the two sectors, But I reckon that what is more compelling is for each party to spell out what are the terms, conditions, what are the costs, what are the pricing, who takes what cost, who bears what cost, and what is the tolerable level of receivable and over what tolerable period. I think all of those elements, if they are spelled out, agreed upon, and signed, in future, we possibly will not have, this kind of unwelcome development, in my view.
I really can't agree more. Now, while we also look at, your thoughts and suggestions on nipping this in the bud, I'm sure you've already talked about one of them. But my question is, at 7 naira or about 7 naira or roughly 7 naira per transaction, isn't that too much?
So I think what matters in this case is for us to capture the moving parts in the economy. And I said the moving parts in the economy because a lot of things have moved in the economy, particularly, cost-driving elements in how people, do their business in the country. A major element in this consideration is the foreign currency, which has moved significantly, as we all know. Another key element is inflation, which we currently have at above 30%. I think what looks like 7 naira or thereabouts, which is currently being charged, has been there for possibly well over 1 year, and inflation has moved substantially well above 30%, and there has not been a room for any increase, to that effect. So I think the 7 naira thereabout is not too much, particularly considering that it has not been increased on the back of inflationary pressure. I think what is more important to bear in mind for customers, for users, is how many transactions do I want to carry out? Can I bundle my transaction together and do more bulk transactions instead of doing my transactions in trickles, so that I save costs as a user of USSD. I think users also have to think around cost management in this regard. I think the 7 naira is not too much, considering all of those factors around inflationary pressure and the impact of foreign currency exchange that has been negative for the broad economy.
Well, you might want to look at the impact of this on financial inclusion. But away from that, I'm looking at that particular amount, which is about 7 naira. How much or how many or what percentage of this is actually meant for the telcos, and what percentage is meant for the bank? How is it being shared? What do we know about that? Or is everything for telcos?
So this is where I said, we lack clarity. And, the banks, have also come out to argue about, how did the telcos, arrive at, that number. And this is something that I believe, the public is, should also, be in the know, because it is something that affects, the entire, economy. Because, for instance, the latest number that we have suggests that over 500 million transactions were carried out, via USSD in 2022, 2023. So what that means is that the impact is enormous in terms of, the exchange of, payments and so on, as, the USSD codes are used for. So we need clarity. As I speak, I'm not too sure, what those economics look like. And these are some of the things I believe the banks and the telcos should spell out, and, let the public be aware of who is bearing what cost, who is bearing what percentage of the cost.
All right. Well, we're back to telcos' demand for tariff adjustment. Now, talk to us. How important is it for the sector to sort of increase tariffs? And what impact do you think this will have on consumers? Because at the end of the day, we still have to talk about the consumers.
Yes, the consumers are very important in this case. But what I reckon is, is happening is that the consumers also continue to have, a lot of options. Instead of you placing normal calls these days, many customers of telcos now using internet over voice, basically making, calls using data, which is relatively cheaper compared to using your normal voice call, via your airtime to make calls. So I think we will continue to see more of that. And that, to my mind, can also underpin Nigeria's, ability to attain what I call a data-centric, market, because many of the developed markets around the world are largely speaking data-centric. Let me now come back to, tariff increases. I think tariff increases are inevitable because of what we are seeing in the economy. So the telecommunications sector remains one of the very few sectors, if not the only sector, that has not been able to respond appropriately to inflationary, pressure, to respond appropriately to the impact of the movement in foreign exchange. I think a tariff increase will go a long way in underpinning the performance of the sector. Let us put in context MTN in this case. As at the first half of this year, MTN had recorded a loss after tax of 519 billion naira. That loss, for instance, the loss could have been avoided if they are able to at least implement some tariff increase, or at least the loss could have been much lower than that. At the same time, MTN Nigeria has a negative shareholders funds. So all of these dislocations in the financials can be filled or can be fixed by being a lot more cost efficient, which they are doing, can be fixed by having more users, which they are doing, but there is a need for some tariff increase, in my view, to underpin the overall sector.
Right. I'll still make a case for consumers. Now, while we understand the MNOs argument, some Nigerians will say they currently pay more for data and even voice calls, whether it's internet or what have you. Doesn't that suggest the telcos have sort of helped themselves somehow?
Not so much, because if they have really been able to help themselves, it should reflect in their financials. The financials that we currently look at does not suggest that they have been adequately, been protected, from the inflationary pressure that we are seeing. On the part of the consumers, I think what Nigerian consumers can consider is more use of data calls, and even the price, even if the data prices go up, it will not be as much, because there is not much in terms of regulatory approval. So what they currently are doing is just some little adjustment in that regard. So I reckon consumers can consider a lot more usage of data, which I believe could be more cost efficient than utilizing airtime in making calls, for instance. So I think that is possibly one of the major ways. Another way also is for consumers to also get richer.
Okay, now that got me. I was not expecting that. I'm just wondering. Interesting one right there. So what are your suggestions for consumers to get richer?
Because for consumers to get richer, I think everyone has to understand that the current environment in Nigeria is not supportive of only one source of income. I reckon that consumers at this point may begin to look to add more sources of income, just so that they are able to cope with the current reality, because it does not look like the challenges are going to disappear over time. One can complain, and those complaints may not lead to any results. But what can be, what can lead to results is one taking actions, and one of such actions is to expand, one sources of income, and also, or possibly you increase the only one source of income to ensure that you have higher income, so that you are, largely speaking, if not completely, protected, against all of these headwinds that we are seeing in the economy on the back of government policies.
Well, for those who cannot run, two businesses or who cannot do two things at a time, it's our hope that their employers will also increase their salaries. I hope that's also part of the conversation. Anyway, I think I just have to let you go at this point in time. Thank you so much. There's a lot to talk about, but my director says it's time to go. So thank you so much, Tajudeen Ibrahim, Director, Research and Strategy, Chapel Hill Denham, for your time and your thoughts. We'll talk about this some other time.
It's my pleasure.
All right.